Okay, Jules. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Rapid Chess Championship knockouts. Week 17 this time, and Raunak is back again for one more week. Raunak was in the knockouts in the previous week as well, and he went all the way till the final, defeating strong players such as Dubois. And in the end, in the final, he lost against Alexander Grishchuk. A bit of a pity, but it was an amazing performance by Raunak, and I'm really eager to see if he'll be able to repeat it this time. It's going to be a stronger bracket. He already starts off with an opponent who's rated about 2,700, Dmitry Andreikin, and if he wins this, he will face Vladimir Fedoseev, who is also an extremely strong opponent. And as you can see, he just defeated Maxim Matlako. So it's going to be an epic match this week. And there we go. We have Raunak and Andreikin almost ready, visible on camera. The games will kick off anytime. And let's not forget, Andreikin is the player who defeated Arjun in one of the Rapid Chess Championship knockouts, which happened during the training camp in Chennai at Horalila Palace. And Raunak will have a chance to avenge his friend. Raunak starts with the black pieces because he had finished lower in the knockouts. Sorry, he finished lower in the qualifier. And thank you, Anshika. He finished lower in the qualifier, and there we have the kickoff. It's the Ragozin defense. White starts with 1d4 and the Ragozin opening. And White goes for this variation with e3 and bishop d2, which has turned into a Nimzo Indian defense. And usually this starts with 3 knights c3 here and bishop d4. That's how the Nimzo Indian defense appears. But that's exactly how it happened in the game as well. And after knight f3 d5, it went into the Rogozin defense. But we are here in the live position: bishop d3, rook e8, knight b5, knight a6. Both the players blitzing out their moves. And Andreikin here not taking bishop into b4, knight into b4, knight into c7. I'm not exactly sure why that is. Probably because there is rook c8. I'll just put that on the board. If he takes knight into c7, there is rook c8 here. The point being, after knight into e8, rook into c1, there is a pin, and queen into c1 is responded to with knight into d3 check. There's a fork. So this is the reason why Andreikin didn't go for this. He didn't take the pawn. Instead, he castle shot pretty quickly, and Raunak is the player with the first thing. It's a 10+2 game, 10 minutes plus 2 seconds increment, and it's a single elimination format. So whoever wins this game, they advance into the semis. And if it's a draw, then it goes into a 3-minute game. If that also ends in a draw, a 3+2. If that also ends in a draw, then it goes into a 1+1 format. And after 3 games, if the tie is not broken, then it goes into an Armageddon. And that's what happened in one of Vidit's matches against Grishchuk. Yeah, there we have the format, and it's an 8-player single elimination format. Raunak taking a long think here after short castle. Now, in these types of structures, Black would love to get this pawn to c6 or c5. This is the decision that he has to take here. And he cannot do it right away because his bishop on b4 was under pressure. So he brings the bishop back, knight e5, and immediately plays c5. But Andrekin is playing super fast, and Andrekin is someone who is strategically very strong. So knight e5, c5, he pulls the bishop back to b1. And if we look at the pawn structure of this position, white has more pawns on the king side, and white's play is a lot centered towards the king side. f4, g4, g5. These are possible options. Of course, whenever you play f4, you have to watch out for the knight coming to e4. But usually white does it in such a way that knight e4 is not such a major problem. So Raunak goes knight c7, trying to trade one of the knights, and if white doesn't trade, then this knight goes towards e6. If white does trade, if he takes knight into c7, queen into c7, and if the game goes towards this direction, I think Raunak will be happy with this trade, getting out one of the pieces. So Andrekin takes the knight back. He goes knight to c3. And I think we have a pretty standard position out there. Black gets a lot of counterplay towards the d4 pawn. Yes, knight to e6. The white bishop is expected to go to e1, or white can play this knight to e2, but I expect bishop e1. But bishop e1, the problem might be that there is a bishop e6 move, and white doesn't have this pawn on f4 already. If the pawn was on f4, white can come rook f3, rook h3 already, but he doesn't have this pawn on f4. So knight e6, the pawn attacked, and white goes knight to f3. This is an admission that things have gone wrong for white, guys. Not so long ago, with bishop f8, white played this knight to e5. But in just 4 moves, this knight goes all the way back to f3. So it's an admission that white doesn't get what he expected in the opening. And this is a pretty nice position for Raunak already. Now he can go knight to e4. This looks pretty tempting. Exert more and more pressure on the d4 point. Black is more developed. Rook c8 is also a pretty nice move. Again, the idea is to get this knight out to e4 in the upcoming moves. And chat, what is your expectation? How far do you think Raunak is going to get this time? Bishop f5, trying to neutralize some pressure on the d4 point, getting the bishop onto this diagonal. Usually white's point is if this rook tries to escape it, then he creates some problem with knight b5. But Raunak need not do this for the moment. What he can do is he can just get this knight to e4 and potentially even play f5 after getting the knight to e4. And now if white plays bishop rook e1, kind of cramping up white's position. This bishop on d2 has no place to go. So now if this knight on e4, now if this knight gets to d4 and if there is pressure on d4, then it's going to be very hard for white to defend against it. And Raunak just plays a6, keeps things in balance. This is also a pretty decent move. One possible plan in the future can be to play c4, b5, b4, but I don't think it's attractive for the moment because there is strong pressure on d4 and white's pieces are so totally tripping over each other. It's not ideal coordination for white in this position. Something has gone wrong for him in the opening, and now Andrekin is slowing down a bit. But it might be too little, too late. Raunak is someone who plays incredibly well against high-rated players in general. He really takes it as a challenge. He is usually quite well prepared, and I think that gives him a lot of chances against someone like Andrekin. Knight to e2. This was understandable, but it's not quite clear where this knight is going towards. f4 is one spot, taking advantage of the pin, but Raunak can just sidestep it with rook c7. Now there's no longer the ideas with knight b5. Rook c7 might run into dc5, bc5, bishop a5. So this is something to watch out as black. So maybe rook c7 has this drawback, but you can start with the knight to e4. This knight has gone to e2, and this knight is relatively unchallenged on e4. So he can start with knight e4, and after knight f4, black can potentially play something like f5. So knight e2, and Raunak thinking about things. Andrikin still has quite a bit of time. He has a minute more than Raunak, which is a bit unusual because Raunak is generally quite fast out of the opening, but it hasn't. It has come at the cost of White's position. Meanwhile, there's a poll out there on the channel, guys. Will Raunak win this match? And I have answered with yes. And you can also participate in the poll and let us know your thoughts. Knight to e4 played by black, and as expected. Now, if knight f4, there is f5. So Andrikin will try to do something like that: knight f4, f5, and then potentially take on e6, and maybe on. He has to be careful if he opens up. If he takes d into c5, he opens up this bishop, so that can get worse. Maybe he will have to play something like g4 here and try and get this piece as active. But it's not easy. And if he has to play something like g4, then he's already taking drastic measures to improve his position. And it's not going to be, it's not going to get any easier for White here, is what I feel, looking at this position so far. So knight e2, knight e4, intense pressure, bishop to c3. And a typical strategy in these types of situations is to try and trade some pieces, so White gets more space. Bishop c3. Now, if black takes knight into c3, then after b into c3, White will get, he might slightly improve his pawn structure. So I think Andrikin will be happy with this development. Raunak goes with the pawn to c4, knight to g3, and now I think, yeah, it was time for f5. It was time for f5, and now he can take this, and oh yeah, knight g5 is super strong. I was just going to talk about how bad this bishop on h3 is, and Raunak instantly shows that. Meanwhile, chat, do hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and yeah, knight g5 is super strong move with the idea of knight into h3 check, and in the future potentially queen h4 and getting all the pieces down over to the king side. There's also the option of rook d8, rook d3, and similar things. So knight g5, and Andrikin has massive problems. He goes with the queen to e2. Black can just go b5 here, I think, and he just defends the c4 pawn. Now knight into h3 can be played, but black need not do that instantly. He can wait. This bishop is not going anywhere. So how does black improve this position? It's tempting to do something like f4 to open up this bishop, but that's how you lose control in these situations. Of course, it has to be done after knight into h3, g into h3, f4, but White is not obliged to take it. And even if he takes it, I don't think black is getting enough compensation. So Raunak has to be slow, and he starts with bishop d5, keeping things in control. Andrikin is trying to prepare for knight into h3, but Raunak is not going to take it anytime soon. There's no way for White to evacuate this bishop out from h3. He cannot play g3. That will lose the bishop on h3, and any other attempt to evacuate it, something like queen f1, g3, it costs too much time for White and creates further weaknesses. So Raunak just improves on the other side, gets his pawn to a5, queen b6 potentially up next, or rook b8 perhaps, because queen b6 there might be some queen d2. So he can play the rook to b8 and try and get b4. Something like queen b6, queen d2, rook a8 is also not bad, because he can then prepare b4 with bishop f8 and then b4. White cannot stop this. B4, there will be an en passant. And look at White's pieces, guys. This knight on e5, no square to go to. It looks nice, but it has no squares, and it is suffocated. Bishop on h3, a prisoner in its own camp, no place for it to go to. You cannot touch this pawn on g3. The bishop on h3 will get hit, and Raunak did play rook b8, but after queen e1, he played the rook to a8, and now after rook a1, he gets the queen to b6. This is the plan we discussed. His pawn is getting to b4. On this side, White is totally paralyzed, and on the other side, Raunak is making progress. So bishop to f8, pawn to b4. These are some future upcoming moves to be considered for Black. Andreykin braces himself with bishop d2, but I think bishop f8 is very much possible, and b4 is coming sooner or later. So bishop f8, then potentially rook c8, and b4 incoming for Black here. So it's a pretty dominating position for Raunak once again, and Andreykin totally in the back foot. Bishop f8 is one option, rook b8 is another option. But what Raunak has to decide is how exactly, which piece does he want to get there. And you also have to watch out for knight d7, knight c5 related ideas. So he plays rook d8, prophylaxis, just preventing his opponent's idea for now. And now he has to make progress. And it would be a terrible idea to play something like bishop at d5 and rook into e5, because this gives White a lot of activity on the long diagonal. So this is why it was not even considered. And Andreykin offers a draw. Raunak declines it. He just goes bishop e6. I guess he wants to get this. It's not quite clear what he's trying to do, but it's quite possible that he's preparing some bishop and d5 and rook d3. But this is one of the most challenging aspects of chess, guys. Yeah, rook b8 was running into a fork. But this is one of the most challenging aspects of chess. To make progress in these types of questions where you're better, but it's not so easy to find how to continue, how to make progress. And I think it's far from clear. You know that you have to go b4, but there's no clear way to do it. If you play rook b8, then there's bishop at a5. If you play this rook to b8, then knight d7, as pointed out by Anand in the chat. And the problem with a move like h5 is it can potentially weaken g6 in the long run. So White can just hold this defensive posture for now and keep moving back and forth. That's all White can do in any case. And as you can see, the evaluation bar is already lowering towards Black, despite not making any major mistake. That's because even in Inoko's move like h5 and king h7 can lead to a change in the evaluation. It can spoil the position. So Andreykin just maintaining his defensive posture for now. Also, something like bishop into f5 here wouldn't have worked, because j into f5, queen into h5 check, and Black had queen h6 here. So this was the point, and bishop into f5 was not working for White. So queen e1, bishop e6, bishop c3, and now he goes bishop f8 after a lot of preparation. And now b4 is coming with force. White can still play bishop d2, hoping to meet b4 with knight into c4. But I think Raunak will play the rook to c8 now. He has the bishop on e6, and it's protecting the d7 square. And there's no infiltration point or counterplay for White. And he can just go b4. So White goes f4. And now it's finally time for Raunak to take a decision. If he takes on h3, then after g into h3, White gets some pretty annoying counterplay on the g6 point. And as you can see, the evaluation bar turns around. It's White who is winning. This was the cost of a weakening move like h5. So Raunak just retreats with knight f7. He keeps his bishop on h3 bad. But now Andreykin comes in with queen h4, knight into e5. This one's far from easy to convert. It's far from easy to convert for black. Knight into e5, and if white takes d into e5, then there is just queen into e3. This e3 pawn is hanging. This variation probably still continues on with queen f6. And if black moves the e6 bishop, then there is e6 with devastating consequences. But black can potentially just stop it with rook e8 and just go bishop g7. So white is forced to play f into e5. And he took f into e5 after 11 seconds of thought. b4, bishop e1. And now it's time for black to enter into white's position. He can take b into a3, or he can start with c3 and create an a passer. He takes the pawn. He simply takes the pawn. He has an a pass pawn. He has a c pass pawn. And he just has to restrict white's entry on the king side. Raunak is low on time, but it's a 2-second increment. So I don't think it will be such a major factor as it would have been in the league stage. Rook a1 attacking the bishop. If bishop b2, this bishop can get into a pin. So I think bishop b4 looks instinctively good. And the other option is to just go all the way back to f8, which feels a bit wrong to me. So bishop b2, it can get into the spin rook b1, but maybe this doesn't look good. So all the bishop moves looking a bit sus here. And apart from the bishop moves, you can do something like queen b2, but I don't feel that natural. You don't psychologically not. It doesn't feel good to keep this bishop on a3. So the computer suggests queen b2 as the top move, but I don't think Raunak is expected to play that. He goes bishop b4, safe move. Everything is protected. When you're low on time, there's a tendency to go towards the safe moves. Bishop b4, bishop into b4. If bishop into b4, then a into b4. And now there is this queen e7 check, but black should be able to comfortably hide on h6 here. And there's no further check on g5, and there's no pawn on h4. So it's also not. But white probably maybe has to go bishop g3, bishop. Oh, g4. G4 is white's counterplay. Now I understand why the computer was not too enthusiastic about black's position. G4, rook into g4, and white's pieces are now getting counterplay. They are breathing some life. And the biggest strategic problem in white's position, the bishop on h3, he has solved that. He has traded that to black's light square bishop. Now white's pieces are out. There is the rook on g4. And now his pieces are coming in and the tide is shifting. So Raunak needs to be careful. With queen e6, he takes control of the e7 point, the entry point. So he's free to move his bishop. I think this position is still easier for black. His pieces are coming sooner. But Raunak has a 1 minute time deficit, and that might play a potential role in a situation like this, in a tense situation like this. So queen e6 attacking the rook, and rook f4, a very natural move which the computer doesn't like. Not an easy position to play here with white either, guys. Now I expect rook f6, trying to dislodge this queen and trying to get more pieces into the game. But white's pieces are not coming actively as quickly as white would like it to be. Whereas black is just one pawn away from queening to go towards c2. Rook c1 attacking the pawn. Now it's also tempting to just go a4, forget about this pawn, but not a good idea. It would allow this rook to on the c file. Yeah, you can go bishop into c3 and rook c8, but it's probably better to just try and keep the pawn. So Raunak goes rook d c8. With this queen, he hopes to stall white's advance of the queen and the rook. For example, rook f6, queen e7, queen g5, queen g7, and everything's protected for the moment. And he's keeping his rooks and the other pieces on the queen side to make sure that the pawn keeps running. So there is always a distraction for white's pieces, and he's not able to create much threats on the king side. So rook c8 played. Potentially c2 is a threat right now. And rook f6 as expected on the board. Now Raunak has two options. Either he can go queen g4, which is what I expected, rook f7 check, king g8. Now queen f6 is the likely move, but the problem is queen f3 check and it's game over. Queen into f3, and this pawn is going to queen c2 and a3. So rook f7 check, king g8, and Rekin just takes the queen into g4, h into g4, and now he has to start finding counterplay of his side, which is probably on the center. He can play the pawn to e6, support it with d5, and then try and get this bishop onto this diagonal somehow, so he can get some rook g7 check. This is White's best counterplay here. So he goes e6 pretty quickly, c2, and now bishop to h4 to get this to f6. Bishop g3 was the other option, but now there is bishop d2, and Raunak has to work this out. Computer doesn't like this. Rook into c2, bishop f6, and there is a potential draw or more for White here. But bishop d2, oh, he goes bishop f6 straight away. Bishop into c1, rook g7 check, king f8, and rook h7, and it's checkmate in one. Oh my god, that was so sad for Raunak. It was not easy to see. It was not at all easy to see. That was such a pity for Raunak. He was dominating the whole game for 80 to 90% of the game. And this counterplay with bishop f6, rook g7 check, rook h7 completely slipped Raunak's mind. And it was not easy to see, guys. It was not easy to see. It was some pretty skillful defense by Andreikin. This was a critical point. The pawn on c2, bishop h4. And now at this point, he had to keep this bishop on this diagonal. So the correct move was to play rook a b8, bishop f6, bishop f8, and it was game over. It was game over for White. White was losing completely. But instead, he started with bishop d2. The most natural move, also what I was thinking about, and I was just thinking about rook into c2, which made no sense. White can go bishop f6 directly. And here after bishop into c1, rook g7 check, black can still save the game. Black can still draw by playing the king to h8. And White has to repeat and make a draw. He has nothing better than this. But instead, he played the king to f8. And this turned out to be tragic for Raunak, because after rook h7, there is no way to prevent mate. Rook h8 is coming. King g8, there is rook h8 checkmate. There's no option to get the king to f7. And any other move, king on e8, king to e8, also rook h8 checkmate. f7 is covered, d7 is covered, and it's game over. This was such a nice game by Raunak, but this is the resistance at the highest level. And he was better right from here. He had such a nice position, this bishop on h3 out of the game. But I think Andreikin defended masterfully. He kept defending, he kept resisting, he kept creating problems for Raunak. And with rook h7, he just summed it up. That was sad. That was, but that's how high level chess is. You get these advantages, but you have no guarantee of converting them into wins. And we talk a lot about winning positions and conversions and the engine evaluations and stuff. But in a 15-minute game, in a rapid game, or a 10-minute game with such low time control, these kind of mistakes are common. It's expected. And especially when you have less than 10 seconds or less than 30 seconds, it's just part of the game. I'm pretty sure he would have seen it if he had more time. I'm pretty sure he would have worked the exact thing out, and he would have found the best way to win as black. But he just didn't have the time to do it, and it's a pity. We'll just have a quick look at before we wrap up, we'll just have a quick look at the Anand Carlsen game, the present position, before we sign off on this stream. So let me just bring that up in a really, really short time. So Anand has the white pieces against Magnus Carlsen today in Norway chess, and it's still at the classical. So the Norway chess has this unique format. It's a classical tournament, but with each draw it goes into Armageddon. And Anand has had an excellent run in the classical format so far. He has a score of 3 out of 4. He has had 2 wins with the white pieces. Sorry, he has had 2 wins and 2 draws. He defeated Topalo and Maxime Lagrave, and he drew against Wang Hao. He beat him in the Armageddon, but he drew in the classical, and he also drew against Wesley. So, although he lost the Armageddon against Wesley, so and here Vichy is white against Magnus Carlsen, and this is the position we have at the moment. And the reason why the computer is excited is because this b4 pawn is vulnerable, and white cannot take queen into b5 because there is rook into b4, and the b7 knight would hang. So rook b2, and there's no way to defend the b4 pawn. Let's take the game from the beginning to understand how we got here. Vichy started with e4. Vichy has been doing a lot of 1e4 in recent times, and he has kind of stuck to it. And Vichy had also played e4 throughout his career, except for a brief period when he started playing d4 against Kramnik for the World Championship match. But that was just 10 years. And in Vichy's career, that's like a drop. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, the Italian, knight f6, d3. And here, Magnus played bishop e7. And the main move here is bishop c5. Bishop e7 is a more passive approach. Short castle, rook to e1. Now d6, a4. This is one of the main moves here, the main position. And the idea of a4 is to gain space. So white usually threatens a5. And when white gains a lot of space on the queen side, the position becomes really cramped for black. So black usually responds with knight a5 to stop the a pawn, bishop a2. This is one of the pawns of the pawn to a4. The bishop has to seek shelter at a2, c5, c3, knight c6, all of them normal moves here. And the main strategic battle here is for the control of the center. So white cannot play d4 here directly. Black would just take and play bishop to g4, and white would have problems. So first he starts by developing his knight, and he wants to get this b1 knight to e3. And this can be done in 2 ways. One is knight d2, knight f1, knight e3. The other is knight a3, knight c2, knight e3. And Vichy chooses to go with the knight a3 approach. h6, knight c2, a6, Carlsen making these general developing moves, improving moves, knight e3, bishop to e6, and then this knight gets to d5, which was the point. You couldn't get this knight to d5 via c3 because a pawn was blocking its way. So he goes from a3, c2, e3, and finally to d5. And here if black takes this knight on d5, this wouldn't be good for black. White would get a lot of control in the center, and black will lose squares, good squares for his pieces. So knight d5, he just goes rook to e8, knight to d2, b5, and now knight f1. Now he's bringing his next knight towards either e3 or g3, strengthening his control of the d5 square. So far, he has been strategically just outplaying Magnus. And Magnus, now he tries to release his pressure on this side. He has made some, he's gained some space on the queen side. So he tries to release some pressure with bishop into d5, bishop into d5, knight into d5, into d5, and knight a5. This would be successful for black if he can get this pawn to b4. But he doesn't have time for it. And Vishy is the first one to get b4. b4, knight b7, and now he brings his rook into the game with rook e2. So there is a lot of pressure for black at this region, a6, b5, c5. White threatens to get the rook to a2, and once he gets that, he will open the a file and either penetrate with his rook or create further pressure on c5 with something like bishop e3. So rook e2, Magnus tries to challenge it directly. He tries to release the pressure with takes a5. Not a great idea. If it works, if everything gets traded, then it just becomes equal, or even better for black because white has this pawn structure. The d5 and d3 pawns are weak, but only if, and it's very concrete here, only if everything gets liquidated. And it's white's turn to move, so it's white's control. It's in white's control how he wants the game to further go further. And he takes a into b5, a into b4, and here rook b1, an important move. And this whole variation is based on this premise that after queen d7, rook b2, queen into b5, there is rook into b4, and this b7 knight hangs. So something has gone seriously wrong in Magnus's calculation, and now he's in a deep thought. But Magnus is in massive trouble. He's just losing this b4 pawn, after which white will also have the b5 passed pawn. And this b5 pawn is really, really potent and has the potential to increase white's advantage further. Black's compensation, black's defense lies in the fact that white does have some weaknesses, the d5 pawn and the d3 pawn. Not so easy to get to them for the moment. For example, you can continue on with knight c5, rook into b4, queen f5, and try and create problems against the d3 pawn. But here, white should be able to give up the d3 pawn and bank his hopes on the b7 pawn. So, like for example, he just gives up the d3 pawn with something like knight g3, allows this to happen, and now he goes all in towards his b6 pawn. So moves the rook, and I'm not sure if it has to move it to b3. He should probably go to g4, create threats here. But the b5 pawn is strategically very powerful. This is the point. But it's still not easy against knight c5, queen a5 to find the best way. So I think this is going to be the critical position and likely response of Magnus. Plus 1.8 by the engine. But here Vishy has to be very precise to work his way towards converting this position into a win. I actually like bishop e3 a lot more than knight g3. Knight g3 doesn't feel great. Bishop e3, knight into d3, and now maybe start with knight g3 and then move the queen away, push the queen away, and then get this rook to b3 because knight c5, there's bishop into c5. So this would be bad for black. And bishop e3, if queen into d3, then I think bishop into c5 should always be a better position for white. This knight will have access to these very nice light squares, and the pawns on b5 and d5 are super strong. So rook e b2, this is the live position. Magnus is down. He's down a pawn. He's down in position. He has to try and find compensation. He goes knight c5. I expect Vishy to take rook into b4. I expect Magnus to play the queen to f5. This is the obvious counterplay. And here I feel bishop e3 is a pretty strong move, which Vishy has to find. And if he does find, then it's going to be very difficult for Magnus to try and save this game. So Vishy just has to sit down, put his head down, and calculate his way. He knows he's better. He knows that he needs to be accurate. And at Vishy's age, he has accumulated so many years of wealth of wisdom that getting to where he has gotten now in this position is the easier part. Getting a strategically better position, getting a winning position. The difficult part for him will be to calculate accurately here and convert it. But if he does manage to do it, it's going to be an epic game. So really hoping for Vishy to get this one across, get one across Magnus. And that's the update on the Vishy Magnus game from Norway Chess here. We will end the stream on this note, chat. Thank you so much for once again staying through. Pity that Raunak couldn't win this time, but it was a beautiful game. and do keep supporting. Do keep supporting our Indian juniors and our Indian players in general. Do hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and do back them through these losses and experiences. And they will keep improving with these experiences pretty soon. So thank you so much, chat. And don't miss the Junior Speed Chess Championship tomorrow at 9:15 p.m. on the same channel with me joined by Katie, and Arjun plays Nihal in the finals of the Junior Speed Chess Championship. So that's going to be a cracking contest to look forward to. And I'll see you guys tomorrow at 9:15 p.m. So see you guys. Take care. Bye bye.